Welcome to the Gamescape, everybody. My name's Jeric, and today we're back in Phoenix Point, and I'm starting a series on the different enemies within Phoenix Point. I wanted to kind of go into detail on each one of the individual types of enemies, the Pandorans for sure, and we might get into some of the others as well. But there's quite a few new players out there, and probably some of you haven't seen all of these guys. So I just wanted to take some time and go through their weaknesses, go through their strengths, kind of give you some idea of what you're going to be up against a little bit later in the game and how they're going to evolve, and just kind of talk about knowing your enemy and knowing what to expect from them so that you can fight them better. So we're going to start with the Arthrons. They're the basic foot soldier of the Pandoran forces, and probably one of the very first that you're going to run into, aside from maybe poison worms. So these guys are very common. You're going to see them all through the entire game. So it's good to know a little bit about them. The first thing, they're going to start out fairly weak. You're going to see this guy first. He's just your basic Arthron. He's got 110 hit points, 9 will points. He's decent speed at 20. No armor to speak of. If we take a look at him, he's got 10 armor on the head, and that's 10 on the torso, and that's it. Everything else is unarmored. Not really a big deal to take out arms and legs on this guy, but at the same time, it's not really a big deal just to kill him outright either. So you're not going to have too much trouble with this guy. He's pretty easy to deal with. His only attack is a pincer, so he has to get into melee with you, and so he's not really that dangerous. So he's kind of just in a class by himself. He's just the basic Arthron. A lot of these others, as they evolve, get to have different variants, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the other one that doesn't have any other variants is the Gunner, and you're going to see him probably next. So this guy is basically exactly the same as him. 100 hit points, slightly weaker, slightly slower at 18 speed, same will points. But instead of a pincer, he has the Arthron machine gun. We'll talk about all of the weapons in detail, but that's basically his only difference. He's got a ranged attack instead of melee. He is a little bit more dangerous. Okay, so then you're going to start seeing evolutions, and there are quite a few of them. And if I kind of zoom out here, I've laid out all of the different Arthron types on one field here, and you can see there's a bunch, right? So your first evolution you're going to see are going to be the shield bearers. These guys are tough. You can see some of these guys have a carapace and some of them don't. And if I zoom in here a little bit, you see how the Arthron has just bare shoulders versus the shield bearer who has the carapace on top of his shoulders. Well, this carapace is kind of an indicator that these guys are quite a bit tougher hit point wise. This guy's got 210 hit points versus the 110 that this guy has. Now, the thing about the shield bearers that you're going to want to know is that they only have the one pincer still. So it's not that hard to disable these guys. If you can hit their arm and get rid of that pincer, he's neutered. He can't hurt you. He's got no other way to do it. He's got his shield, and if we kind of turn the camera this way, you can see it. And what he'll do is he'll deploy this shield in front of him so that it's blocking any attacks that you're sending his way from the front. And it's pretty effective. The basic shields are 100 hit points and 30 armor. And then these evolved shields here, like this one, are 150 hit points, I believe. Yeah, and 50 armor. So they're actually fairly tough to punch through. You're going to want to try and get to the sides of these guys when you're attacking them. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit too. So that's the next evolution that you're going to see. And you can see, like I said, there's several different ones here, right? So you've got your basic shield bearer, and then you have two different alpha variants. And the differences between these are just different weaponry, right? So this guy's got the evolved pincer and the evolved shield. This guy has the basic pincer and the basic shield. So just tougher, more damage on the pincer, etc. Then you've got 3 variants of the champions, and you can see these guys are getting pretty tough. This guy here has 340 hit points. And then the last variant is the prime at 440 hit points. This guy is rough to take down, but again, his pincer is pretty easy to just shoot off. It takes a little more effort, but once that pincer's gone, this guy can't hurt you. He's just going to run off the map, or he's going to just sit around doing nothing or whatever. So he's not that big of a threat, but just actually taking him down takes some doing if you're trying to actually kill him. Looking at our next row here, we have the Arthron Brute. This is the first one that you're going to find that has two different weapons. The Brutes have a pincer and they have a poison spitterhead. Okay, so he's got a melee attack and he's got a ranged attack, and all of these guys are the same thing. This is the same deal as the rest of them. He's got the basic two alpha variants with different either evolved or not evolved pincers and spitterheads. Then you got the three champions that are basically just tougher, more hit points, more armor, and then the prime is, you know, the toughest of all. He's got everything is evolved. He's got really good armor and more hit points. Although he doesn't have nearly as many. I mean, if you look at this prime, he's only got 260 without a carapace versus the basic shield bearer who's at 210 with the carapace. So that carapace makes a big difference, and you kind of want to keep that in mind. The other place that really is going to come into effect, probably mid-game and later, is capturing these guys or paralyzing them, because you can't see what their endurance is. It doesn't show their endurance anywhere unless you have the console enabled. You can get it from that. It doesn't say what their endurance is, but the endurance is how many paralyzation points they need to take before they are completely paralyzed. And it's kind of the same deal. The ones that don't have the carapace are much easier to paralyze than the ones that do have the carapace. And look for the ones without first, and they're going to be easier. And then they get more difficult as well as they evolve up this, up through their progression of different variants too. So, you know, it's much more difficult to paralyze the prime, obviously, than it is the basic. So, but, you know, if you look at, you know, the shield bearer versus even some of these more elite non-carapace ones, they're either the same or easier to paralyze these guys than even the basic shield bearer. So, it's a guide you can kind of use to judge if you want to try to paralyze them. It's just one of those things that isn't published, and so I wanted to kind of cover it just a little bit. Their actual endurance varies pretty widely. I think he is the worst at 9, the Arthron Brute at 9, and the toughest one is, I think, 44. It's one of these primes. I think it's this one here. I think it's the Tyrant Prime is the toughest, or maybe it's the Shield Bearer Prime. I can't remember. But it takes a lot to take down some of those primes and get them paralyzed, especially with the carapace. You're looking at 42 to 44 endurance that you have to do, and your Hera is only doing 7 points at a time. So it takes a little doing to get that done. Next one in line, you have the evolution of the Gunner, which is now the Arthron Scourge. Okay, still has the machine gun. Add a grenade launcher to the other arm. And so you've got 2 ranged attacks. And then right behind him is the Arthron Tyrant, who's got a shield and the machine gun and a poison spitterhead. So in order to get this guy disabled, you have to take out 2 different weapon systems as well. The next evolution up is the Bane, the Arthron Bane champion, he's basically an upstepped Scourge. They've got the carapace, and they've also got a launcher, but their machine gun is now doing viral damage on top of regular damage. So that's going to do some willpower damage to your troops that get hit and get the virus damage done on them. Then you got the Dragon, and you'll notice these last 3 sets here, they don't have a basic or alpha versions. They're just champions in the prime. So they're late game variants. The Dragon is the upscaled Brute. He's got basically the same thing as a Brute, except his grenade launcher is now also doing acid damage. And so we'll check that out in a minute. And then you have the Myrmidon, which is he's got the pincer and the grenade launcher. He's just much tougher. One of the things that you're going to notice is that some of these guys have kind of a purple cloud over them. And so I want to talk about that real quick too. That is a Legacy of the Ancients DLC edition. And it adds this ability randomly to different Arthrons, and it can be any Arthron. After a certain point, you'll get an intelligence report about the Tar Shadow ability now becoming a thing. But basically what happens is when you kill one of these guys that has this this purple cloud over him, or if you look and you see the Tar Shadow ability, what happens is a different type of Arthron called an Umbra spawns kind of in its place where it was. And the Umbras are pretty tough. I couldn't find one to spawn. I couldn't figure out how to spawn one in, or I would have kind of shown you, but I couldn't find it. And so I'll just kind of tell you a little bit about it. It is a 500 health. It's actually pretty fast, speed of 26. And then it's got a special pincer that does 90 points of damage and 20 armor piercing for one action point per attack. And when it spawns in with full action points and it's ready to go, and it'll come after you immediately. So if this guy dies of bleeding on his own turn, that Umbra is going to spawn in and it's going to activate right away. The way you deal with these guys, if you don't want the Umbra to spawn, is there's actually a few different things you can do. Number one, you can paralyze them, and that way they don't die, and they still count as killed at the end of the mission if everything else is done. The other thing you can do is just disable their weapons and not kill them and basically neuter them. The problem with doing that with some of these guys is that they're going to be bleeding. And if you hurt them too much by disabling their weapons, they're going to bleed out and you're still going to get the Umbra. So that's a possibility that you have to kind of watch out for, especially on the weaker ones, like this guy here. I mean, these guys, especially like the Arthron Scourge here, if he's an Umbra, I mean, if you breathe on this guy and use a little bit of harsh language, he's going to fall over dead practically. It doesn't take much to kill these guys. And, if you disable its arm or its grenade launcher, it's going to be bleeding. He's only got 90 hit points to begin with. So now you're probably not going to see him that late in the game, but the same holds true for these tougher versions of them too, though. I mean, even the prime here is only 180 health. So if you happen to catch one of those, it's possible that they'll bleed out after you get their weapon systems disabled. So that might not be totally useful as a mechanism. The third way that you can avoid the Umbra is killing them with fire damage. And if you kill them with fire damage, then they will not spawn the Umbra. So there's a few options for that. There's fire grenades, there's flamethrowers. Mutoids can launch fireworms, and you can use fireworms to destroy them if you use that ability, etc. So if you can do fire damage to them, they'll just die and the Umbra won't spawn and everything will be just fine. So let's kind of just do a real quick look at the different weapons that they have. So we'll start with the basic guy and we'll kind of check him out. He's got just the basic pincer. It's pretty easy to kill. 50 points of damage will destroy it. It does 65 damage on a hit, 1 shred armor, and it is a melee attack, so it never misses. And it's only 1 action point for him to use. So if he's close to you, he can hit you with this thing 3 or 4 times, depending on where he's standing and how the AI decides to move him around. So he can do some damage once he gets close. So you do have to be a little bit careful about him. So, and this is the same for everything. All of these guys have the same weapons. They don't get worse aside from the evolved versions of these things. They don't get worse as they get higher in the evolutionary chains and stuff like that. So a pincer is a pincer for these guys. Some of these guys have the evolved pincer, which like this guy does. So if you look at the evolved one, it just does more damage. It's 95 damage, again, with single shred and 1 action point to use. So they're pretty nasty if they can get in close to you. The basic machine gun, we'll take a look at that one next, is 35 damage with 1 shred and a burst of 6. Okay, its effective range is 13, which isn't very high. So it's not a particularly accurate weapon. It only costs 2 action points to fire, though. And so one of the things that you should be aware of with all of these guys in their attacks is none of their weapons are 3 action points. Everything is either 1 or 2. And so what that means is a war cry, for instance, it will help, but it won't completely shut them down. They will still be able to use their weapon even if you war cry them. And so that's something to kind of keep in mind. Now, it'll help in that they won't be able to fire twice, or they won't be able to both move and fire, but you can't guarantee with a war cry that you're going to be safe from being shot at by these ranged weapons. So that's one to bear in mind too. It's not unuseful, but it's not a guarantee. So that is the basic machine gun. And then if we find one of these guys that has an evolved machine gun, this guy probably does here. Yeah, he's got the evolved Arthron gun. This one is 45 damage and 3 shred with a burst of 6, and its effective range is slightly better at 16 instead of 13. Again, 2 action points to fire, 36 ammo, so it can take 6 shots before it reloads. Getting fairly nasty. And then the viral version, we take a look at that. The viral machine gun is only 25 damage with 1 shred, but it does 1 virus damage as well. And if you're not familiar with virus damage, every bullet that hits your soldier is going to add 1 virus damage to the stack. And so at the beginning of every one of your turns, you're going to take willpower loss equal to the amount of virus damage you have on you, and then that virus count goes down by 1. So it takes a while for it to wear off, especially if you get hit 6 times. You're going to be losing a bunch of willpower, and that's going to make your guy panic fairly often. So that's virus damage is a pain to deal with. So the evolved version of this viral gun is basically the same, just more damage. It's 30 damage with 1 shred, burst of 10 instead of 6, and effective range of 17. So better range, better damage, more bullets coming at you. It costs 2 AP, and ammo capacity is 6. Again, 6 full shots of 10 before he has to reload. Pretty nasty. The next thing that we're going to look at is the poison spitterhead. These things are pretty bad too. They don't have very good range, but they get nasty in a hurry. So the damage on them is only 10, and it's got 20 piercing, which means it ignores 20 points of armor. And it does need to actually do damage for the poison to take effect, but with 20 piercing and 10 damage, that's going to get through most armor. Probably not your golem armor, but your Odin armor for sure is going to get penetrated by that, and probably most other armors too that aren't heavy armors. So you're probably going to take the poison, and then you take 60 poison damage. And poison works exactly the same way as viral damage. It stacks up. So 1 hit, you take 60 poison damage. At the beginning of your next turn, you take 60 health damage, and that stat goes down by 10. And so the turn after that, you'll take 50. Turn after that, you'll take 40, etc. You can get rid of poison damage with a med kit. It'll remove the entire stack, no matter how many there are in there. So poison in this game's no joke. It gets to be a big problem in a big hurry. And the problem with it is when it stacks up, unless there's a really weird edge case, you're going to end up taking that damage at least once, because it's going to happen before you can activate again and get a med kit going to remove it. So the only possible way you might not have it affect you would be if there was a friendly NPC that has a turn before you. But even then, I think they usually go before the Pandorans do. And so you're just going to take that damage no matter what. So if they stack up, 120, 180 damage of poison on you, you're going to take that damage at least once. So it gets bad in a hurry. And if we look at the evolved spitterhead, which is what this guy has, it's even worse because it does 15 regular damage with 30 pierce and 80 poison damage. So that really stacks up quick. Now, the nice thing about both of these is they only have an effective range of 5. So they're not particularly accurate weapons. Effective range, if you don't know what that is how many tiles away you can expect to hit a human-sized target 50% of the time, which is 5 tiles away, not very far. These guys are 2 tiles apart each. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 this far. This guy here, from here, you would hit less than half the time with that. So that's the one kind of saving grace for the poison spit, is it's not very accurate, but when it hits you, you're going to be in a world of hurt, and there's just not much you can do about it. So the grenade launcher, if we take a look at that, we have the regular launcher. It does 50 damage in a blast radius of 2.5 tiles. Its effective range is only 11, so it's not particularly accurate either. But the problem is it's still going to land somewhere, right? And if all it has to do is get close, so it shreds 3 armor off of every position that it hits. And how grenades work in this game is when they land, they're going to try to basically attack every single body part on your soldiers that are in range. And so the ones that they can hit they'll only hit each body part once. But the ones that they hit take the damage and the shred, and then the overall damage to your overall hit points is the total damage minus whatever the weakest armor point they hit is. So if you have two, three, let's say you get hit in two different locations. Let's say it hits one leg and one arm, and you happen to have 10 armor on your arm and 20 on your leg. Well, it's going to choose the lessers, so the 10 armor, and it's going to do 50 minus 10 is 40 damage to your overall health. And then it's also going to do 40 to your arm and 30 to your leg, 30 because you have more armor on the leg. And then it's going to shred 3 armor off both of those locations. So grenades are very, very good at shredding and hitting multiple body parts in this game. They don't do a lot of actual damage to your total hit points most of the time, but they can disable limbs pretty fast. It only usually takes 2 hits from grenades to disable your arms. And at that point, you can't really fire your weapons or anything anymore. So a couple of grenades can put you in a world of hurt pretty fast too. So there are blast vests you can get later on that help against that. You basically take half damage if you're wearing a blast vest, and that helps a lot. You can take a few more hits before your arms and stuff are disabled, and just high strength on your troops helps too. Each one of your limbs has more hit points before it's disabled. So, but yeah, grenades can be a pain. And then if we look at the evolved launcher arm, it's again basically the same thing, just more. So blast of 60 instead of 50, shred is still 3, effective range is still 11, so it's just slightly more damage. Blast radius is still 2.5. The up jumped version of those grenade launchers is the acid grenade launcher. Blast of 10, not very much damage, but it also applies 10 acid to everything that it hits. And then how acid works is similar to poison, except every body part that gets acid on it, the armor is eaten away first. Okay, so if you have 20 armor, let's say you're wearing just standard Odin armor, and you get hit by this thing, and you get hit in different limbs and in the torso and whatnot, each part that gets hit is going to lose 10 armor that first turn, and then the next turn it's going to lose. It'll drop down to nothing. But if it continues to stack up, you'll lose. Let's say you get hit by 2, for instance, and so you have 20 acid on one or more of your body parts. Okay, the first turn after, at the beginning of your next turn after you get hit, the 20 acid damage is going to do 20 damage to your armor first, and so that basically is going to take your Odin armor down to 0. It's going to shred all of your armor off. Then the stack's going to reduce to 10. The next turn, you're going to take 10 more damage to each body part. But now that you don't have any armor left, now it's going to affect that body part's hit points. So it just burns through the armor first before it affects the hit points is the only real difference between this and anything else. Same idea for range. It's 10 blast plus 10 acid. Single shot effective range is still 11. Blast radius is still 2.5. Still 2 action points to activate. And then same thing with the evolved acid grenade launcher, just more 20 damage, 20 acid, same, everything else is the same. So those are the weapon systems that you're up against with these guys. And some of them you're not going to see till later. These guys are late mid to early end game types. And you're even going to see probably not the primes till pretty late in the game. But the rest of these guys you're going to see fairly early. These guys, all of these guys, you're going to see in the late early game into the mid game, and then you're going to start seeing their more evolved forms after that during the mid game. A few tips and tricks with these guys. These shields, when they're deployed, can be a pain to deal with, and especially if you're in tight quarters, like in a cave, like a Pandoran lair, for instance, where there's not a lot of room to maneuver to the sides of these guys. To get around the shield, that shield can be kind of a bit of a problem. So one of the things to know about the shields is when they're deployed, and I don't have anybody with one deployed right now, so I can't really show you very well, but picture this shield standing upright in front of this guy. And you'll notice that the bottom of the shield is kind of narrow and kind of hooked. So if you're while you're looking at this guy, If you look in the kind of the lower right corner of his deployed shield, kind of down by his foot right here, you'll see his arm is exposed. And so if you have a good sniper or somebody with really good accuracy, or if you're really pretty close to him, what you can do is you can shoot that little exposed part of the arm and it'll knock his shield off if you destroy the arm. And then he's just standing there without a shield anymore. And then you can just blast away at him with your next shots. So that's one way to kind of deal with those shields if you can't get to the sides. If you do have room to maneuver and you can get to the sides of these things, I've kind of personally found that it's much easier to attack these guys from your left, their right, as they're facing you, because all of their kind of vulnerable parts are more exposed from the right side than they are from the left, right? Because really what you're after on these guys is you're after this arm, and you're after the head sometimes if they've got a spitter head. And those are the things that you really need to take care of. With these shield bearers, the arm is it. That's it. If you disable the arm, this guy's neutered. He's no more of a problem. But when you start getting into some of these more evolved forms, like the, let's say like the Brute, you know, the Brute doesn't have the carapace, but he still has the shield. So it's kind of tough to get him. But you can still get his arm. And then if you can get his head, you don't have to kill him. Now, again, these basic ones, you breathe on them nice and hard and use a little harsh language and they fall over dead. They're not very tough at all. But as they get more evolved, they get a little bit tougher, a little bit harder to take down. You know, these champions have 200, health. The Prime has 260. So it takes a little bit more doing to get rid of them. Third thing to know about these guys is that every single Arthron that has a machine gun of any type, whether it's a regular one, an evolved one, or a viral or evolved viral, they all have return fire, which means if you fire at them, they're going to shoot back at you if you're close enough. And so the thing with Arthrons is they can't see very far. Their base perception on all of them is 25, which means they can basically detect you at 25 tiles if it's good visibility. Now, there are other things that affect that. Your gear will affect that either positively or negatively. At nighttime, that range gets cut in half, etc. So calculating exactly how far away they can fire is kind of tricky. But the nice thing is you don't have to, because they've added in at some point, and I don't know when this happened, but they added in this thing where if you hover over, let me zoom out a little bit. If you hover over your cursor over the guy, you can see this orange circle, or it's actually a dome if you look a little closer. And that orange dome is the range at which he can return fire. So if you're inside that dome, he's going to shoot back at you. If you're outside, you're safe. So that's a good tip to know about these guys. Is this thing, you can hover over them and see exactly how far away they can return fire, and that'll help you know if you're going to get shot at, or if you need to move farther away and take your shots from a little further away, etc. So every single one of these guys that has a machine gun has that return fire ability, and if you hover over them, you can see what their range is. So today, this is a daytime mission, and they have their perception of 25. So, if we count it out, it comes out to here. If we go back to him, it should be 12 or 13. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Right. So range of 12 is what his max retaliation range is. If you're beyond that, you're safe. No problem at all. And then the last thing that I actually already mentioned it, is none of these guys have any attacks. There are 3 action points. So again, War Cry, still useful, but isn't going to completely shut them down. So that's about it. There isn't a whole lot more to say about these guys. They're very common. You're going to run into them a lot, and just kind of knowing and taking a little bit of time to figure out which ones are which, right, is going to be kind of helpful to you. And you don't have to be clicking on the info for each one of them every time you run into them, right? So just things to keep in mind. Your base Arthrons, just kill them outright. Shield bearers, all you have to do is remove the claw, and they're just neutered. Starting to get into the brutes, you have the pincer and a spitterhead. With the scourge, you have the machine gun and the launcher. With the tyrants, you have the machine gun and the spitterhead. And these guys you're not going to see till later, but they're just upscaled versions of the ones we've already seen. So just kind of knowing what their weapons are and it doesn't really matter that much if it's regular or evolved, just knowing that, you know, this guy's got a pincer and a spitter head, so I need to deal with both of those things. That's really helpful. And it saves you time to not have to, you know, be clicking info on him every time to look and see what his weapons are and whatnot. So it's useful to just kind of take a minute and memorize a little bit about what each one of these guys can do. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to go over these guys, just a little more in-depth look at the guys that you're going to see all the time. And I'll do all the other Pandorans too in different videos. We'll do the Tritons next, and then probably after that I'll cover the Siren. I know people have a tough time sometimes dealing with the Siren, and so we'll go over kind of some tips and tricks for dealing with her as well, and kind of what their different variants are and what different abilities they have as well. So that'll be upcoming here in the next few videos as well. So anyway, that's all I have for the Arthrons. So if you've enjoyed this video and if you've learned anything, do me a big favor, hit that like button. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.